Hey, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Political Pariahs podcast. Two lifelong friends entering our 30s. We love to talk politics, economics, and markets. Hey, George.
Hey Jack, how's it going?
It's going. This week, our topic is AI. Among other things, we tend to ramble, but we're going to try and keep it focused around artificial intelligence. I bring this up because I can't show this chart, but if you look this chart up, you can find it, listeners. We are now in a world where our GDP growth is more largely determined by AI capital expenditures. So that's companies buying NVIDIA GPUs and building data centers, does not include the power capacity needed. But that is more consequential to our economic growth than the growth of consumption, of just actual people buying stuff. And so the question is, how soon will we just do everything through AI? Maybe I'm being a little facetious, but what's your take on this kind of AI takeover, George? Just a high level overview.
Yeah, well, the AI takeover has been fascinating to watch over the last 5 years. I joined the tech world in 2020, and AI was just getting off the ground. I remember, and I worked for a very large company in the healthcare tech space. I remember going to an all hands company meeting, 15,000 employees. One of the executives of the company was posed a question in the FAQ section about AI. How invested are we in AI? And he went up on stage and was basically like, it's a bubble, it's a joke, it's just like VC to sell crappy startups, and like it's like blockchain, it's just like a buzzword, just to get investments, and we don't believe in that. We're sticking to our core business. I can tell you right now, within 2 years, that sentiment changed real quick. And now that company has a partnership, I believe, with Windows or Microsoft
Mhm.
to have like an AI integration into their core healthcare product and for their backend support as well. So like their technical engineers can leverage AI to quickly search through documentation to resolve technical issues. And I think that's where I see AI headed. I don't really buy into the hype of AI is going to completely take over and like change, eliminate all of these jobs and like replace everything. I think that's just us being a little imaginative with a new technology. Kind of like when cell phones were new or like iPhones were new, we all thought that within 10 years we're going to have this slim piece of glass that's see-through and like has a hologram. But you reach a limitation to the technology, right? Where you kind of reach a final form of like, okay, here's what we can do with this at this time. And I think that's where AI is headed, where it'll be like a crazy good support tool where it'll help you with coding. It'll help you with support on the technology side, looking through years of logs to find an issue that's happened before, rather than having a human waste days doing it. So that's where I see AI headed. I don't think it's going to be quite the scary revolution that some people think it is. But your comment does alarm me a little bit about the expenditures because, if it is a bubble and if it's not as important as it is, then we have a risk of the bubble bursting in a couple of years potentially and kind of pulling back to where it's, a steady state.
Yeah, one of the things about bubbles in history is that they tend to leave around a lot of cheap infrastructure after they pop. And I don't know if we're at the peak of the bubble. What I've been saying about AI is that we are in a bubble, that's no doubt, especially in markets. I think we're in a bubble in the way that we're kind of imagining the world. And we've always kind of seen the future a little bit too optimistically than what we actually get, right?
Right.
And there's limitations to physics that we don't consider, limitations to safety or just what's profitable, right? Like there's a lot of things that we could have in our society that would be very nice for us, quality of life, but they're not profitable to provide. So no company provides them. They'd lose money. That's why we
Exactly.
have the government to provide things like that, right? And
Right.
so one of the things I think of in this AI bubble is that we need to see the profit from the actual AI services because there's no doubt Nvidia is hugely profitable.
Hmm.
If you're selling the picks and shovels for the gold rush, you've made money so far. But can ChatGPT keep the lights on for $20 a month? Sam Altman says no, right? There's a tweet from him where he's like, it's funny enough, we thought people would use ChatGPT way less than they do.
Yeah.
They use it a lot more than we thought, and they're bleeding us dry.
Yeah.
We make no money off this.
Well, the energy costs and ChatGPT just launched, ChatGPT 5, I should say, just launched.
Hmm.
And I was actually just recently reading an article that the ChatGPT 5 power consumption can be as much as 8 times higher than ChatGPT 4. And now
Wow.
I use ChatGPT. I have a subscription. Like again, I find it
Mhm.
very helpful for work in the tech world as a support tool. And I've used both ChatGPT 4 extensively and now ChatGPT 5. I have to say, I don't notice a huge difference. I believe the Washington Post recently dropped an article and they kind of agreed with that. They still found false answers and that, it's supposed to be better, but it's not a revolutionary change. And even that is consuming potentially 8 times more energy. And I mean, I know people who are not in the tech world, they're not in the business world. Some of them are stay-at-home spouses and they use ChatGPT as a therapist. They're just chatting with it. They might go to it for advice. I've seen people on social media say like it's like the feel-good content where they're like, if you're lost and you don't know what you see for yourself, ask this question for ChatGPT or like, what's the 5 things I need to focus on or something like that. But there's people leveraging ChatGPT for that, which I'm sure Sam Altman was not anticipating that ChatGPT was going to become someone's best friend or therapist and get used basically like a texting buddy all day long. That is such a drain on power grids.
Yeah, and it's a really inefficient use of resources, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
the amount of energy and compute power that we spend creating AI boyfriends and girlfriends is
Yeah.
incredible. It is this like ultimate form of economic nihilism that we are spending all of this money and power to create a product that is being widely used by kids cheating in school and people trying to fix their loneliness problem. We've seen this. I don't have this graph. It was in my Substack this week, jackbowman.substack.com, of a graph that is AI token usage for ChatGPT, right? How many queries they're actually getting. And it drops off the first week of June. It's this
I've seen that.
huge
Yes.
throw, right? And then it just plummets to half all through the summer. And it's starting to kick up again now that we're back into school. And it was a stark reminder of like how much of the actual usage is people using it to solve problems that they should be solving for school, right? Of course, in school, if you use AI for all your stuff, you didn't learn anything. And then you solved
Right.
problems that no one really needed you to solve, right? I have also seen this roll out into businesses, and Copilot is a great example of this, Microsoft's Copilot. My mom works for a large healthcare provider on the IT side, and she's been having Copilot kind of thrust on her. She's a little resistant to it. She's like, I can write my own emails, thank you. Like and she has this kind of attitude towards it of like, oh, it's okay. And she's warming up to it. Like every time we talk about it, she's like, it actually is more useful than I thought. And I think that's one of its powers. Is it in the business to business world, that's where the money will be made. I'm sure you can sell AI therapy to people. I'm sure they do sell it. I bet there's apps out there that sell AI therapist specifically. But I think the most use, the most profit, and where we should be looking at to see where that's going to happen is going to be in the business to business space.
That's where OpenAI and Sam Altman are dropping the ball. They're focused very much on the consumer side, which is, college students, not a lot of money there. And it seems like some of the more entrenched big company players who are now shifting to AI are focusing on that. They're not focusing on a consumer app AI. They're like, how can we leverage this in the business space and sell it to other huge corporations who just don't want to invest in their own AI model?
Or their own AI infrastructure, right? And
Right.
I remember this tweet. It was like, we went from covering the planet in solar panels to covering the planet in data centers really fast. Like there was
Yes.
some switch, and I know it was a political switch, partially, right? But also it was this. It happened before the political switch. That even once ChatGPT launched, and there's a great chart that is office constructions versus data center constructions. The ChatGPT launch marks the pivot point in both.
Hmm.
That since ChatGPT's launch, data centers have only risen in new constructions. We're just building more and more and more at scale. But office buildings are falling in constructions, right? That construction's moving. Well, we can have our workers remote. Half of our workers are just AI now, right? And we can downsize that operation in the office buildings. They're not as profitable to build. The data centers are. And most of these are not going to be used by the corporations building them. They're going to be rented out to other
Hmm.
businesses, right? This is why these data center REITs, these real estate investment trusts, have become so valuable. They're like the average data center real estate company is more valuable than like most of the tech sector.
Yeah.
Which is
No, it
insane.
absolutely is. There's so much money made on the data storage side. And I mean, you look at a company like Amazon and you look at their financials, the AWS side is what's really carrying the company. And even other tech solutions like the B2B tech solutions, the example I use, the healthcare tech company, they have their own servers here in the north central United States because it's nice and cold. Part of the fees that they charge, it's not only the license for the software, but then, hey, if you want to have it hosted on our servers versus your own servers, well, that's an additional cost. And there is a lot of money to be made there. And there are so many, businesses like hospitals that they don't want to have to worry about their own server infrastructure if they can outsource it to whoever they're buying XYZ product from. It's going to be a huge moneymaker for sure.
I was on a podcast for Seeking Alpha, the Investing Experts podcast, and I was part of a panel. And one of the other participants was an analyst from Israel. And she was saying that they don't have a lot of Amazon delivery there. Like they still do have Prime and whatever else. But the big thing is you see advertisements because Israel is this huge tech hub, especially in Tel Aviv where she lives, where you see like Amazon Web Services ads, AWS ads everywhere. And she was saying that, like, it's funny to me to think about Americans only have this conception broadly, especially people who aren't plugged into business or tech, that Amazon is a delivery company first and foremost. But when it's different to me as an Israeli because I see the ads for the tech side of it, and I look into the data and I find out they're only making money because of AWS, right? It is their
Yes.
primary revenue source. Deliveries by far are a loss leader, right? They're the Costco hot dogs of Amazon, where you're going to lose money on it, but people pay for Prime because of the delivery, right? The
Right.
fast windows and all that. So you have to lose money on it to keep them.
Right. And you would think that perception of Amazon would change in the United States with all the AWS NFL ads that they run every season. It's like every other commercial is like powered by AWS, next gen stats. And you're like, what the hell does this even mean? And before I got into tech, like, I'm not gonna lie, I like football. I would see those commercials and I'd be like, that's sick. I wonder what that even is though. Like, do I go to AWS and see stats? Like, I don't get it, you know? And then I got into tech actually later on, ended up working with a startup that had a lot of staff in Israel. It was
Mm,
like half headquartered in the United States, half in Tel Aviv. And of course, on AWS, all
yeah.
of our other startup partners there on AWS. Hell, when an AWS server goes down, typically you'll see like half the internet shut down. Um, like every time Instagram is down, it's usually like an AWS outage.
And this kind of begs the question too about this bubble stuff, right? If Meta and Amazon are both being bought up and bid up because of this AI bubble, because of their own AI investments, but they are also the primary AI customers,
Right.
right? Is there some outcome that we could see that doesn't rely on the big tech companies just providing the funding source? Like, could we actually sell AI in mass to consumers?
I think it's difficult with consumers, like we're seeing with OpenAI. I think, like you said, it's going to have to be a business to business solution initially, and then maybe it comes to the masses as a feature, as a Siri in your iPhone. And if that
Mm.
happens, and OpenAI hasn't, moved on to business, then they're screwed. If Siri starts being able to do what ChatGPT can do, you can just ask Siri a quick question and it'll give you a potentially false answer.
Yeah,
Um,
with less hallucinations this time. And I will say I was impressed with OpenAI because this is the first time I've heard them talk about hallucinations using that word. Where they were like, it hallucinates less. Like five does a better job. We see less instances of this false information flagging. But I was impressed because most of the AI news stories I see, they don't mention it at all. They're just
mhm.
like, we've made it better. And internally, and to be fair, the way that machine learning really works is sometimes the developers don't really know why it's better. They just know that the output is better.
Yeah.
So they like that, right? So that's really all they can say in some cases is like, we made the output better. We have no clue why. We feed random inputs, and sometimes it gets better, sometimes it doesn't. The LLMs are the way I heard it best was from a professor, it was a German professor on YouTube that talks about tech, and she was like, they're word calculators. They're
Mm.
really, really good at this, right? But they're not storytellers. They can't create narratives. They can't think. And if you jumble together the most commonly said or commonly written phrases in English, you get something that does resemble reasoning
Right.
because by and large, humans reason, right? So it looks like there's reasoning, and the thinking process they show you looks like there's reasoning, but it's kind of mimicking reasoning.
Right.
And this is what makes me dubious of being able to sell to consumers because when I ask Siri a question, I want not just a source, but also I want to know that the answer is like going to be correct. If I have to double check or triple check Siri, or I have Bixby on my sad Samsung phone, but which I don't use because Bixby's useless. But if I were needing to double check those answers the same way I need to double check ChatGPT answers, I don't think I'd use it as much. Hmm.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's not so good at reasoning, but it's excellent at processing data.
Yeah.
And so the use cases that where I've seen it be super successful, like on the tech side, like I said, there's an issue. If it gets escalated to some engineer who's resolving issues, they can quickly jump into, let's say, GitHub or wherever they log their resolution tickets and ask, hey, I'm seeing so and so impacting this and this. Have you seen it happen with any of our other customers that we service, any of our other hospitals? And instead of you having to dig, with keywords and all these basically forum posts that you have to dig through to try to figure out what's wrong, you can get a pretty quick answer, or at least like it can give you a list of, hey, these are the posts that seem most related to the issue you're experiencing. And that is a huge help and can save, billions in man hours over a year, when you think about it on a per issue basis, right?
One of the things I found interesting about the way that AI is interacting with consumers, because I think the most common interaction people have now, that's not just asking ChatGPT directly questions, is the Google overviews. And I saw
Mm,
a fascinating stat that was newspaper referrals, so links that send you to a news site, have increased dramatically. It's almost double what it was 10 years ago on the internet. People are actively clicking links that take them to news sources. And the direct link to the news source homepage is down dramatically.
interesting.
It's telling us is like people are being referred to Reuters or to Washington Post or Bloomberg or whatever through the Google overview. They're not actually going to search out news. They just check what Google tells them is the news. But I wonder how many people never actually click on the news sources. They just take whatever the Google overview is and then that's their news.
Right. And I think maybe that's why Google is kind of towing a fine line and maybe getting away with it. It's because they are, they definitely put the link that here's a news source at the top. But I'm sure that it's costing these news sites revenue.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's costing a lot of instructional content, right? Like the how-to guides and recipe creators and all the people who publish things that can't be or that could just be generated by ChatGPT. Not because ChatGPT does a better job. And I want to make this clear that like in my use of ChatGPT, I have never found that it does a better job than something a human has made, at least someone who's qualified, right? Like I'm talking about
Right.
like analytics tables and spreadsheets and things like this. Like ChatGPT does an okay job. It does a very sufficient job. It doesn't tend to do a better job than our best humans, but finding the work of our best humans is very difficult. And
Hmm.
getting ChatGPT to do an output is not difficult. I'm a little biased towards this, just for readers listening. I was a teacher from 2020 to 2025, and so I experienced the AI boom through the classroom lens first. And I had a big group of at risk kids who saw AI and had the perfect revelation of it can do all of my homework. And I don't have to do any thinking. And so I got not the AI that was like AI assisted work. I got just AI slop fed to me wholesale, copy pasted directly into Word documents, and I had to change the way that I taught entirely because create a presentation no longer has any value when ChatGPT can make the presentation for you. right? So it wasn't teaching skills that they need, because I know when they're going to go into a job, they're going to get Copilot, who's going to make the presentation for them. And they're going to be expected to do that to save time, right, by their boss. So even having those like basic skills of computer literacy become less valuable. And so I'm a little jaded about the AI topic, on top of the fact that it's running our economy now.
Yeah, I mean, that also brings up an interesting point of what it looks like in the workforce, right? You're seeing Gen Z start to enter the workforce. It's not easy for them. Some would say harder than ever. I don't know. It was pretty tough when we were coming in too. So I don't know if it's harder than it was for us, but
I
it's
saw a
certainly not
stat
easy.
about this. It was that for the first time ever, this is like 18 to 24-year olds, for the first time ever, the unemployment rate for college graduates is higher than non college graduates for 18 to 24-year olds. Over the total population, it's still in sync, but almost always your unemployment rate goes down the education you have, right? So doctorates have like a 1% unemployment rate.
Mhm.
Masters are at like 2 to 3, bachelors are at, 3 to 4, and non-bachelors are at 4 to 5%. But now it's flipped for bachelors and non-bachelors, Gen Z.
That's fascinating. And it's going to be interesting to see what their early careers look like with the introduction of AI. And when you're bringing somebody in at the entry level in a corporate role, 99% of the time, it's some kind of support role to somebody more senior, right? Making those spreadsheets, making some presentations on, let's say, like some kind of financial side. If it's a project management role, doing an early, smaller project, whatever it may be. But if you're having ChatGPT do those things, even if it's a new hire saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, like give me an analysis on, with this data," that new hire is not learning the fundamental understanding of like the why and the what, behind the business. So then how are they supposed to advance, right? How does that person become a senior analyst and then give strategy recommendations to the C-suite, right? When they don't fundamentally understand it themselves because their job was asking ChatGPT. And beyond that, if ChatGPT were to eliminate any roles entirely, I feel like those entry level roles would be the first to go. So then how do it's the classic, like you need 8 years of experience for the entry level job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I feel like that is only going to get worse.
And I see this replacement of the bottom rung of the
Hmm.
corporate ladder as being one of the critical parts that we're going to need to tackle as a society, as AI becomes more advanced, as it hallucinates less, as it gets better.
Yeah, an example for some of your subscribers, since this is, economics focused,
Mm,
I imagine some of them might be coming from a sales background, a B2B sales background, whether that's tech sales or another industry. Think about your SDRs, that initial entry level sales role. And I'm not in sales, by the way, so might be giving a high level overview here, but that entry level sales role where you're cold calling, and most of the time just getting rejected, just doing that initial scoping and prospecting, that can be done by AI now. There's entire customer service teams that are now being replaced from AI. We outsourced customer service from the US to India, and now we're outsourcing it from India to AI because AI can follow those simple prompts, and the voice model now is so similar to a real human that the average person struggles telling the difference with some of these. So how's that going to impact your pipeline of salesmen and women, right? Like if your SDRs, you don't really have SDRs because you have an AI tool doing it. How are they then going to develop into your enterprise sales representatives who are going to go out and meet with CEOs and close the deal, right? You still need the initial fundamental people skills and sales skills that you build as an SDR before you can move up to a mid-market or an enterprise rep. And I feel like that's kind of where, situations like that is where you might see ChatGPT displace some careers.
And it's not all doom and gloom from
No,
the
no,
the
of
business
course not.
perspective, of course, right? And I think about this of ways that we've seen AI washing fail, right? So AI washing is this idea that companies who are not really using AI or who don't have a use case for AI feel like the market and their shareholders want them to be using AI because that's the future. And so they roll out a chat bot for their website and they're like, our website is now AI powered, right? And they can kind of spin that to shareholders, and it's a chat bot. And most of the time the chat bot just directs you to a person. Right?
Right.
Or in the flip side, I don't know if you remember Build AI. This was a company that unraveled this past year. They were a company that advertised, we use AI to build apps. So if you have an app idea, you can feed our AI the idea. You can just write it out in prose, and then it'll create an app for you, and it'll build it all out. And this was like a business to business solution. This was not for everyday people to build stuff. This was like selling, if your business needs an app, we can build it. And it turns out it was an outsourced project. They would just send it to Indian software developers who would then build the apps with Copilot. And Copilot's a great coding tool, right? ChatGPT is a great coding tool, but it wasn't actually building the app. Like there was still a developer who was using the tool to build the app. And then they would send it back to the customers in America and be like, look what AI did. Amazon did this too, right? Some of their Amazon stores, there's a camera in the shopping cart. So when you put items in your shopping cart, the camera tags them. And supposedly there was an AI system that was watching every time you put something in the cart, it just totaled up your bill. And then when you were done, you didn't have to go to a checkout counter, you just left the store. And once the cart left the store, you got charged for all the items. And as it turns out, this was actually a call center in India that was watching the cameras, and the AI would kick back like 60% of items. Because if you didn't get the barcode in shot or the right angle, or you just tossed it into the cart too fast, the AI didn't catch it. And so you had the teams of people that were doing the majority of the work that Amazon was claiming was all done by AI.
Yeah, I remember that scandal. And, people, investors in particular, have to be a little bit careful because you see that very commonly in the startup space where it is we joke that it's just a ChatGPT wrapper, but even if it's not just a ChatGPT wrapper, it's like an API to just like six other startups. It's all outsourced, and really they're just reselling you like a combination of a variety of products marketed as a service. They tend not to perform particularly well because it's all glued together from third-party systems, right? And when you encounter an issue, it's a pain in the ass to resolve. What I've seen on the financial startup side is companies advertising AI, like we're leveraging an AI model in our underwriting. And it's not an AI model. It's like a basic algorithm that factors in like a soft credit check, for example, right? And then maybe their own repayment history with the specific firm that's, doing this financing. And they'll call that like history of payment within their own company as learning. That's not learning, right? Like that you're not building any artificial intelligence there. That's
You're
just
just
a
adding
basic.
variables to an algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, you're adding a payment history variable to an algorithm from your own lending institution. There's no AI there. There's no learning happening. There's no thought. But you'll see that, marketed to investors heavily, heavily. I've seen startups where it's like every post on their LinkedIn is about how amazing their AI model is at underwriting. And I know for a fact that there is no AI model in their underwriting. They're doing soft credit checks through, Experian and TransUnion.
I wonder how much of it is just AI washing, not even just in underwriting, but across the board, of how much even AI hype that I've been kind of fed into that is just algorithms kind of masqueraded as AI. Last kind of big topic, AI and government. So we
Hmm.
have seen these AI systems now, ChatGPT, OpenAI, and I think Microsoft is doing this with Copilot. They have provided their services to the government for $1 a year. How do you see our government using AI, and is it going to be helpful or dangerous?
I think it depends on the product, right? So something like ChatGPT or Copilot could be a support tool. The government is a massive bureaucracy. So leveraging those support tools to dig through documentation or legislation, regulation, whatever, that is awesome. I'm sure that could save tons of man hours for the million plus federal workers we have. That being said, you also have companies like Palantir, who are partnering with, the TSA or Homeland Security, and there's tools being rolled out for, biometric scanning and a lot of surveillance things. And up until very recently, we viewed that as dystopian, right? We would look at China and say that their social credit system and their heavy surveillance state is like excessive, right? We had
Mhm.
such a negative reaction to the Patriot Act, and then we see what the CCP does by comparison, and we think that's insane. But if you're paying attention in the AI space and the government contract space, we're kind of moving towards that system. And that's what I find scary. So it's a little bit of both. I think it could streamline the government and be a great tool for some products, but there are other companies that are getting into the government sphere that are a little scary. Not that you shouldn't buy their stock because they're ripping, but but they're a little scary.
I have owned Palantir stock since they went to market in 2020. It was an easy sell for me. They're the guy, like their AI system found Osama bin Laden, to something that the American intelligence apparatus struggled to do for a decade. They were the ones who cracked it, right? And of course, we can talk about Palantir's valuation is astronomical and is so indicative of bubble behavior, right? But the capabilities that they have within government systems and combat systems, which terrify me. I've done a lot of reading and listening and watching of the Russo-Ukraine war and how intelligence systems are being deployed there militarily, and that's not the cutting edge, right? Like
Mhm.
Russian military tech, Ukrainian military tech is not the cutting edge of tech, and even that is terrifying in a large intelligent capacity.
That's just the
Mhm.
small time stuff. I mean, you have startups now, startups like Enduro, who if
Mhm.
they, when they IPO, I will be there because I think they're going to be potentially the next Lockheed Martin. But they are developing autonomous drone systems, for example, that can act as an escort, like a co-pilot or a wingman to an F-35. And the
Wow.
F-35 pilot can then say to this, it's a large drone, right?
Mhm.
It's basically the
Yeah,
size of a
they're
fighter jet. It's not like a little
yeah,
drone.
we're talking
And
UAVs, not FPVs. Yeah.
correct. It's a big drone, fighter jet flight performance characteristics, and the pilot can then tell that drone, go scout ahead, fall back, like engage these targets, engage those targets. Uh, so there's a lot of opportunity there to leverage this new drone and stealth technology, and then once you pair it with AI, it can become quite the weapon. And obviously, you're not seeing that deployed anywhere right now. That's this very high level tech that we're saving for a near peer adversary like a conflict with China. But I think you're going to see AI development there too with these autonomous combat systems for sure.
One of the things I've been telling people is that the firing of IRS workers recently was kind of a tragedy because we got rid of some of the most expensive people, which makes sense from like a budget standpoint.
Mhm.
But the most expensive people were there because they're really good at uncovering tax avoidance patterns in huge corporate tax filings, right? Things that AI has a hard time doing because there's so much data and all the data checks out. Like it's all legit, but we're trying to figure out which ways they're performing what's called concealment, which is
Right.
where you're just hiding some money or moving it elsewhere, right? Apple did this with Ireland, where
Mhm.
they were paying all of their profits to Apple Ireland to lease the schematics, the IP for iPhones and Macs and whatever. But it meant that Apple USA produced no profit. So no corporate taxes, even though they did produce a profit. They just
Right.
paid it to themselves. And in Ireland, their corporate tax rate is much lower and what have you. But so we needed people to uncover these particular instances. But I think in ways AI is going to be really helpful is finding mass discrepancies in very simple tax returns. So, like,
Mhm.
if you have a really complicated tax return, now might be the time to cheat on your taxes. That's not financial advice, but the government is reducing its capacity to work on your taxes. But if you have a small tax return, I would expect more frequent audits moving forward because you're going to get audited by an AI system. And that output is going to be fed to an auditor who can do a lot more audits in a much shorter amount of time, so long as your stuff's getting picked through.
That's fast. That's actually a fascinating. Um, so,
Not yeah, right. I was like, are we that worried? Is most of the tax revenue that we're missing out from little people? I don't think so. I think it's very hard to cheat on your taxes when you have just a W-2 because the W-2 doesn't lie, right?
yeah,
You just got to submit it. You don't have a holding company in the Caymans that you can funnel money into, or large capital losses you can carry over from years of loss leader performances and things like this. Like it's much harder to cheat on your taxes when you're a little guy, but it's going to become even harder to get away with it. Same thing
right.
with like social security list, right? We know the Doge people ran the social security list through AI to try and find dead people. the amount of money we saved wasn't worth putting a person on the job because you really needed a team of people and it'd be very
Right.
hard to do and just not worth the man hours. But it's worth it to have Grok do it.
Right.
You can send Grok on the whole list and it's done in a pretty short amount of time. And
You see that cost benefit analysis weighed a lot in the corporate world as well, especially at a let's say a smaller startup where you have 50 employees. There's a lot of times where we weigh, let's say, an engineer's time, and we'll say, this customer or this whatever, they're kind of small, not bringing in a lot of revenue. Don't worry about it. Like, let's focus our attention elsewhere. It's literally not worth your salary time for us to invest in improving XYZ product for XYZ customer. But if you could have an AI do it or pick up some of the slack, then that might justify, shift that cost benefit analysis a little bit.
I want to pitch to you. This is my last thing today. Then we'll wrap up. I want to pitch to you a conspiracy theory I have. So,
Okay.
for viewers at home, I'm not a conspiracy theorist generally. I don't engage in a lot of conspiracy, but this is my conspiracy. So, the US government wants to borrow $1 trillion this quarter, just this quarter. They're on an unsustainable path forward and they need to do yield curve control, right? Basically, forcing institutions or the Fed or whoever to buy treasuries to force yields down, just create artificial demand. And very recently, they just passed legislation that is going to allow 401k providers to provide access to alternative asset classes, right? These are private equity funds, real estate funds, private real estate funds, not REITs, different distinction. This includes crypto and other things like this. I see this as a way to juice up, to add liquidity to the ongoing middle market PE bubble. The PE companies, the private equity backed companies, are like not doing so well. They're having their lunch eaten by big tech AI because it turns out that all the AI middle market companies just can't compete with the mega cap tech giants.
Right.
So when this bubble pops, I expect to hear a lot of bad news out of the private market because
Hmm.
that's who's going to get wiped is all these software companies in the middle like you're saying, repackaging all these products and venture backed startups and whoever else. They're just forming chat gpt wrappers
Right.
and they're loaded up on really expensive debt that's tied to floating rates and whatever else. And when they blow up, it's going to blow up a good amount of 401k assets. And my conspiracy is that part of the yield curve control is that they're going to try and amend ERISA. So ERISA, ERISA, is the act that establishes like the rules for what is and is not fiduciary within a 401k
Hmm.
and other retirement plans. It regulates pension funds, whatever else. I can see them mandating as part of ERISA that part of your allocation is in a conservative fixed income product like US Treasuries. And my conspiracy is that part of the way the government's going to rein in their ability to spend, because it's getting out of control, they're going to lose their ability to spend if they don't fix it. They need interest rates to come down, specifically on the long end, which the Fed doesn't control. The Fed can't just lower rates and turn the 20-year Treasury down. They only lower it's like 6 months. They really only control the overnight rate, but that affects the 6 month rate really, really heavily. And if they mandate that pension funds and retirement providers are buying these assets, they can ensure they don't need sovereign demand. Like we don't need Japan and China and Britain to keep buying treasuries. We can make Americans do it through these, structured retirement plans where you don't really have a choice, right? You can't completely self-manage a 401k. Part of it's done for you. Right? Your choice selection is done for you. And if part of that choice includes a mandatory allocation to treasuries, we may be stuck with these low yield treasuries for a long time. This is my conspiracy. So we'll see how this plays out, but I'm watching it.
I don't think that's that crazy of a conspiracy. I think that's entirely feasible and within the scope of this administration. Economic theories and the types of economists they brought on. That's where it misses me with this administration because if they stuck true to their word, I would understand and I'd be like, okay, I get it. Country's in a rough spot, spending too much. We need to make cuts. We need to find alternative means of revenue. We're going to make that happen. But we didn't see that happen, right? Like we're looking for a few pennies on the dollar here and there wherever we can get it, like scraping it and causing, like, frankly, international fallout for it. and then increasing our spending anyway. So like what is the point? Like what's the point of all of that drama and instability and maybe a few billion in kickbacks potentially at the sacrifice of growth because of all this instability, right? And investment,
Mhm.
companies not knowing what direction to go because of all this instability. I don't know. I don't know if it's a net positive in the end. I feel like at the end of the day, we're still spending more and going further into debt, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll see.
Thank you for being here with us today, folks. You can find me online, Jack Bowman, on Seeking Alpha or jackbowman.substack.com.
They can find me on our next episode of this podcast.
Then we'll see you all next.